Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli, and I'm so glad that you're here. We are all about entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. I'm an angel investor, and I've worked with entrepreneurs over the last 25 plus years, and I have learned how to start companies and build them into really valuable enterprises. It's been a wonderful career, and now I'm bringing together that network of people one by one to share with you how they became successful as entrepreneurs. And it's never, ever a straight line, but it is a calling. So if you'd like to be sure you don't miss any of these episodes, please subscribe at paparelli.com. Just submit your email, and you will also get you'll not only know that when one of these interviews comes out, but you'll also get as a bonus, you'll get my Tuesday blog that I send out. So thanks again for coming. Our theme today is how I found my entrepreneur sweet spot. And my guest today is Rob Kishuk. And Rob is a friend, and he is also the founder of 3 companies right here in Atlanta on his way to this company, Bellwood Labs, which he's founder and CEO of. He's a Georgia Tech graduate with honors. He has an MBA from Georgia State, and he is I've just known Rob for years and loved running into him because he's the entrepreneur's entrepreneur. This is something that he's been chasing for a very, very long time, and now he's found that sweet spot. But he's also a community developer. He's always in it for the other guy. He wants everybody to succeed. He's a believer that if everyone succeeds, everyone gets lifted up. Our community is a much better startup community to be a part of. And he is one of the founders of this community. He's done a great job. So again, our topic is how I finally found my entrepreneur sweet spot. And Rob, I welcome you. Thanks for joining me and helping entrepreneurs help entrepreneurs.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Glad to be here. And thank you for that glowing introduction as well. It's a pleasure to have some time to chat with you.
Well, it's easy to have a glowing introduction when you graduate Georgia Tech with honors. That's pretty cool.
You got to do something with it, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a good start, though. I remember talking to my kids saying, my oldest, in fact, is saying, I knew that she was like you. She did really well academically. And I said, why are you doing really well in school? She goes, it's not that important to me. It's more important to you. I was like, well, wait a minute. I said, when you get out of school, the only thing that they can judge your work quality on is how well you did in school. So it's funny when you got those gifts, how sometimes you just don't appreciate them even, But she's done pretty well. She's got a law degree and she's got an MBA too. So she succeeded well. Good girl.
That's going places. Yeah.
And a good mom. She's my oldest. She's 40 now. Man, she's just a little younger than me. That's getting up there. So you seem to finally settle of all these places I watched you go and all the places we ran into each other in Midtown. You finally settled at Bellwood Labs. What took you so long? Why did it take you so long to finally get to this sweet spot where you seem to
I think it was really,
now,
Yeah. I think it was 2 things really, right? One of them was waiting to feel like I was qualified. So I came right out of Georgia Tech and I was joining other people's companies, but I felt like I needed to get good enough and rise high enough in those ranks and achieve some sort of success with another startup before I was qualified to start my own business. And then the second part is once I did that, I then felt like I needed to do certain things that were expected of a startup founder in terms of, it's going to be a SaaS company and it's going to raise money this way and then that way. And I'm going to follow this path and those trajectories. And there's certain things I'm not going to do or admit to, like being in a services business. Mm-hmm. And so the journey has really been me just being a little slow and peeling away those layers one by one until I just feel comfortable in my own skin and something that feels true to where my strengths really are.
How long ago was it that you can think back as to when you decided I needed to be an entrepreneur?
I felt very entrepreneurial. Early on, right? I have a lot of the stories that a lot of people have. My first job was, I was a paperboy, right? I was delivering newspapers, and
Me
I was delivering
too.
newspapers door to door. Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Makes me seem kind of old, but walking door to door
Wait
in
a
my
minute.
apartment
How if
complex
that
after
makes you
school.
feel old? What does it do to me?
You're just at least equally my age. I don't know. But it's you go to school all day and then you do the work of delivering papers, whether it's hot, whether it's cold. This is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I delivered papers in -60 wind chill. And you go door to door, you do the job, and you actually have to collect the money. Right? So there's something entrepreneurial just in that. And I can get into a lot of other things, but my next job after that was selling drinks, selling Cokes at Tampa Stadium when we moved to Florida. And I'm at Tampa Bay Buccaneers games, and I'm holding up drinks and I'm shouting it out. And in that job, you literally have to buy the tray of drinks from the stadium and sell it. And if you drop them all, that's on you, is how that worked.
How old were
at
you
least
then?
at that time? I was, I think, like 13, 14 years old.
I didn't know that they
schlepping
allowed
up and down the
stuff like
stadium. Well, I don't know.
This is in the stadium? This is at the games?
Yeah. You're walking up and down the stands, ice cold Cokes.
So you were
That's
a hawker.
the,
So how did you mean the hawkers can be 13, 14 years old, or they must have a limit now because they all look older now?
I guess so. I don't know. And then
But
they might not make them pay for their own trays now.
Do you look back on that and say that's when I knew being a paper boy, I was a paper boy too. It wasn't that I even thought about I was in my own business. Okay.
Yeah.
I felt like I was still kind of working for somebody because there was such high accountability. Like if you didn't do the collections you were talking about, then they started thinking they needed to find somebody new, right? Because they're delivering free papers, so you can get fired. But was there a point you just said, I just know I need to be in my own business? I don't know. Was that the time that you really felt that way?
No, it was probably more evidence, right? It was the same thing as when you're in middle school. I was one of those kids who was selling candy in middle school, and I had sold candy in middle school that I bought at the corner store so I could eat some myself and buy tomorrow's inventory and keep a little bit for myself. So, that was probably more DNA evidence. It was probably more just evidence in history. When I was graduating from Georgia Tech, I had a decision of whether I had an offer from Chick-fil-A's corporate, where I had just done an internship and I did my co-op at Delta. And I had an offer from a venture-backed startup called AirDweb here in town, which was one of Jay Chaudhry's portfolio of companies once upon a time. And that was the start of that decision process. And I think it was probably about 5 years after that, I was VP of product development for a startup. And I think that's when I started to really say, you know what, like, I think I can do this job of starting a company better in a meaningful way that is good for the customers, it's good for the team, and it's a fit for me. That was probably, let's say, 7 years out of college.
7 years out of college. So what did you find? So you were kind of happy working for somebody, working for Jay at AirDweb and whoever else you worked for after that. You were kind of happy in that role. Yeah. You weren't anxious like, oh man, I've got to do my own thing. I got to think of an idea. I need to get out there. Didn't have that.
Yeah. Well, especially then, at least the way I felt, the burden to raise venture money in 2000, just, it felt distant, right? It felt like something I really did need to achieve something material before they'd let me in the room.
Yeah, but that still says that you had as part of you this knowledge or this conviction, I'll call it, that you're going to start your own thing.
I wanted to grow into it, and I felt like I had to grow into it.
You had to grow into it. Okay. Yeah. And so how did you, how do you go from, okay, so I've got good background. I've kind of watched the show for a while. I understand how it sort of plays out. But you're still working inside a company. Yeah. How do you working inside a company, were you able to build any kind of network?
A little bit. I didn't
start something new, just flat footed. Like, I really don't know anybody except the guys I used to work with,
Yeah, I didn't have a network for most of that time. I didn't really know what it was like to kind of get out there. I fiddled around in the Java developer community, but it didn't really feel like home. I am a software developer by background, and I felt like I wanted to imitate these other guys who were speaking about Java programming and nationally touring conferences, whatever. I thought I wanted to be that, but that was just the best example I had to look at the time. And the thing that started to click more and where I really started to engage in community in a way that I enjoyed was kind of a big moment for Atlanta technology in general, I think, which was the 2007 Atlanta Startup Weekend. I went to that. I didn't know anybody from anybody. And I just said, well, this seems fun.
I remember that. Where was that?
That was at ATDC.
Oh, it was? Okay. Yeah. Atlanta Startup Weekend. And what was the purpose of it?
It was started by a guy out of Denver, I think, Startup Weekend. And it might have been Lance Weatherby that even brought it here, because Lance was still on staff at ATDC at the time. And I think he was part of saying, hey, Atlanta should have a Startup Weekend. And at the time, the premise was I think we had 80, 100, maybe 120 people coming together on one weekend to start one company. And so if you want to see a bunch of people get grumpy, it was fascinating, because the company that we decided to collectively start was this blog widget called Scribbit. And you watch all the guys that came in.
120 people. I thought you were saying they were going to create 120 companies. No, 120 people, all strangers, come together for a weekend and come up with one idea to solve.
Yeah.
How do you even do
that? And about
a
third of the people, it's a mess. And later weekends, they split people. They had people self-select into teams, because the attrition after the first day, when we said, hey, we're building a blog widget, all the sales guys ran for the doors. They're like, there is nothing here. We don't want to be a part of selling a blog widget. How does that work? So the rest of us put our nose to the grindstone, built the thing, and I built some friendships there that are lasting. And that's when I kind of engaged more and said, okay, maybe the startup community, that's the community of people I want to engage in.
When you were in that experience is interesting that you said, I want to explore that for a second. The sales guys all ran to the door. How come you would think that the sales guys, who have always been customer facing in their career, you would think that they would know what the problems were that needed to be solved. But who won out in that whole discussion were the technology guys.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that the way it should work? Did the technology guys have no respect and didn't listen to the sales guys, or the sales guys were just frozen in place, not knowing what to do?
I think part of the dynamic there as well was what everyone was looking for. And you see this in a lot of sort of founding of startup problems. You have the person with the idea who's looking for a developer, and you have the developer who wants to work on something. And that's always the kind of the debate and the exchange. And I think the developers wanted to build something that they could launch that weekend and mostly walk away from. And a lot of the sales guys, I think, were looking for the next big thing to be a part of, where they'd get a baked-in development team and they'd work with them for months. And none of the developers wanted to sign up for months. They had a day job. They had something else they wanted to do. And that's often the thing, right? The idea person's like, I want a technical founder, and they want somebody to grind on the days, the nights, the weekends, for nothing to get the thing built. Maybe that's just a stereotype, but that's how it felt. Was the sales guys who were there came there for a job. The developers who came there to build something interesting.
That's it. I think it is an interesting insight, because what we're seeing now, and what I see now, is you do have a lot of sales guys, if you will, or business people. They can be from customer success roles in some other areas, but they identify a problem in a particular industry that they've been working in for like 10 years. And then the biggest issue that they have is they can't find that developer who's passionate about that and is willing to grind on it, as you said, day and night for it could be 5, 10, 12 years, right? It's like, I don't want to sign up for that. I want to get something done. I want to kind of move on. So how do you ever get these developers and salespeople, or these business, these industry expert people, how do you get them together that you can actually, from your standpoint, being a computer science guy, how do you get them together? You've seen enough of this thing. How do you get them out together so that you wind up with a good balance of founders and a good company?
It's a good question. I think, there's two things going on there, right? One is, I think for the most part, it comes from relationship that's hard to force, right? It comes from, I know a company in town called Dubbot, right? And Dubbot, the CEO is a very successful salesperson for Pardot from the David Cummings empire. And his lead developer is a guy he worked with at Pardot. And so they've known each other over this span of time where there's a trust and a mutual respect that just seems to work out. Now, the other thing that is interesting now, at least at the seed level, the criteria, I think because the size of the market for software has increased so much, right? There are so many unicorn companies being minted, all the time now. It used to be $1 billion valuation was rare.
I'm with you.
And now it's a little bit common, right? And I think because of that, the valuations at early stage and what you can raise in a friends and family round has advanced. We work with someone who raised a $500,000 seed round pre-product. And so what that allowed them to do is they didn't have to have the developer.
Do you remember the valuation for that 500,000?
I didn't have that. I don't have that information. I don't know.
That's the other thing that's happening. The valuations are astronomical because it's just assumed that they will be $1 billion companies,
Yeah. Yeah. And so what that lets them do is then they can actually hire that early developer and, they're spending some capital, but they're not spending equity on it, and they can hire in the developer a little bit down the road. And so definitely I'm seeing that a good bit more is because the potential valuation is bigger, the early valuation is bigger, and you have more options that involve compensation to get that first product built.
Yeah, so it's not in the startup weekend, like you were saying. I think to clarify for the audience, it really was sort of sales guys that were looking for a computer science guy who was going to just work on this for free or for equity, no money.
Yeah.
Right. And work on it forever while the sales guy stood around and waited for them to come up with a solution. Right.
Yeah. And I do wish, I wonder if somewhere Lance has a picture on his first iPhone or something of the ideas we rejected that weekend. Cause I'd love to see what we didn't work on that maybe the business guys did.
Of people together like that, 120 people. How do the leaders sort of show themselves? So you got 120 people. You couldn't have it at 120 people. It's like a Zoom meeting, right? Only one person can talk. So how do you get 120 people to coalesce around an idea? How did that process? Do you remember what that process even looked like?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, there were certain touch points during that probably still influence how I think about software today, right? Because there was sort of a directional, what do we want to build? Then what could we build by Sunday night? And then, then we take a break and the marketing team starts to work on a brand because we said we're going to, it was a widget for blogs for visitors to suggest a topic that the blogger should write about. Okay. So it was, an interesting premise. And I think parts of it would still be valid today because you still don't see that sort of dynamic except in the comments, but the comments are kind of an unstructured mess. This was very structured. A little widget pops in, enter a topic or vote on one. So once we decided on that, the marketing team goes off to decide on the brand name, and the biz team goes to riff on how could we go to market. The developers start, design starts designing, developers start slinging code and getting the basic stuff set up. So you kind of, there were pulses of touch points throughout the weekend. So there's some work you can do without talking to each other. Huh?
See, you kind of got me right to the idea, and then you kind of stepped off from there. And I get that. That makes it, now we have something to point to. So now we have sort of a problem to solve. But when you just this group of 120 people, we're going to start a company.
Yeah.
What happened? Did somebody stand up and say, I got an idea?
Yeah, I mean, we started with ideas and we voted on them. So that's part of how you had this sort of thinning of the people who left. So we had, we had kind of like
voting for the Pope. Everybody scratched something out on a little piece of paper, and we all opened them these little pieces of paper and voted on them.
And then the magic smoke comes out. Yeah. So no, we it started with most brainstorming. For me, it's best to start with brainstorming that's just wide open stupid. Let anybody suggest anything.
Yeah.
Go out of bounds a little bit in order to find what's actually in bounds. So we had probably, I would guess 40, 60, 80 ideas on the board. And you go through some rounds of voting, you thin it down to let's say the 3 top ones, and then you vote on those. And then you decided, right? You said, we are going to, and each idea had a champion to it. So there was a guy who lived here for a while and now works for Twitter, goes by Stammy on Twitter, Paul Stamattiu. So he's on the UX side of Twitter now. It was his idea. He was passionate about it. He kept on working on it after the weekend. He ran with it, raised a little bit of money. I think Stephen Fleming had a fund that got to kick in a little bit of money into it to make it happen. So we're on a little tour of Atlanta Tech. But he was the champion. So he did have sort of the broad product vision, but then you do riff on it. You're like, okay, the idea is that everybody voted on is it's a suggestion widget for a blog.
See, and that makes sense to me. See, the difficulty with brainstorming, though, that I've always had, and it is a problem that I actually have, is so I love the idea of ideas. I love to be in those meetings where we're just kind of tossing around ideas. But generally what happens is people feel uncomfortable with that, and they want to immediately get to be working on something. So it limits the openness, that out-of-boundness that you talked about. You know, so it took somebody, was it Lance maybe, that was sort of facilitating that so that he kept it wide open.
And it was also we actually brought in the guy who started Startup Weekend. It wasn't always like that later. I think I recall the guy's name was Andrew Hyde, and so he made like a little bit of a hustle for a while, a little bit of a job out of wandering around the company facilitating
he became sort of the black
Weekend.
belt of Startup Weekend.
He was the guy. So he kind of shepherded us through the process as well. He learned at least something, but I'm not even sure if they had figured out yet how to sign off on the IP. Like later on weekends, they had a simple IP agreement. I think that IP was a dumpster fire at first because I don't think they got everybody signed on it before the weekend. So you can imagine having an 80-person startup with no signatures on who owns it. That alone, that kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies.
By the way, I really like the idea of this widget. For blood. Did anybody ever do it? Because I would love to adopt it.
You know, we did it, and it was out there for a while. And I can't remember whether it was purely shut down or whether it was kind of a quiet acquisition. I don't recall what happened but it was Scribit with a K. So SKRIBIT. Had a little
say that again.
SKRIBIT. Okay. It had a little frog with the ribbit thing in the logo.
Okay. You even had a logo. I love it.
Yeah, the designers. We needed the designers
to do some things. When you come out of this weekend, you know, here you are. You're saying, I do want to work for myself. I do want to be an entrepreneur. I have my own company. I work for other companies. I go to Startup Weekend. How did Startup Weekend propel you closer to that? What did you learn from it, or how did it encourage you, or maybe even discourage you?
Yeah, a little of both for sure. Because I can't remember whether I went to probably, before we had kids, I went to probably 2, 3 or 4 or 5 of these Startup Weekends. And
how often did they happen?
Once a year. It was a once a year event. It became one of those sort of ceremonies of Atlanta Tech, like you have Venture Atlanta. You had some folks who started Atlanta Web Entrepreneurs was another. There were these groups, startup drinks, that started to, out of this time, I became aware of it. But you asked about how did the weekends in particular propel me forward. And so I think it might have even been when the second one was coming up, or the third one. There were 2 Startup Weekends where I actually pitched a project and had a team. And so that was really, really fun because I'm now kind of flipping, I'm not just participating. I pitch an idea, people like it, and they join my team for a weekend to build a product quickly. And so I get a chance to be the product visionary, and I get a chance to be, I wasn't the main person with my hands on the keyboard because I had started to kind of build this network of people. I tended to pull, and this has always kind of been one of my superpowers, if you will, is attracting talented software developers. So all throughout, even different leadership positions, I've been able to attract the developers. And so when it came time to vote on the ideas, the developers just wanted to work with me because they figured we were going to have fun and we were going to ship something. And I didn't want them to have a job at the end of the weekend. So it was sort of an empathy and understanding of what the developers wanted. The idea of pitching something a little bit funny. So one was I had been increasingly involved in understanding what social networks were capable of. And so I was looking at these APIs, and this was kind of like the stuff that got Cambridge Analytica in trouble. We built a Startup Weekend dating app using that same data, and we built a Startup Weekend social game, a football game on Facebook. And so people just wanted to kind of come and work on those, and we had a good time doing it. And I think it encouraged me.
When did you decide? When did you come to realize that you had this superpower of attracting developers? That developers wanted to work with Rob.
Yeah, I think that started around, I want to say 2006, 2007.
When did you
and
graduate?
it was my 2000.
Okay, so 6 years you were in business. Okay.
Yeah. So it was when I started to get elevated into management roles. So I was a manager at Proficient Systems, which was acquired by LivePerson, Greg Freistadt's company. Greg started Proficient. And I was there like, hey, you're a manager now. I'm like, okay, great. I'm a manager. And just going through those hiring processes, I just saw that I was able to get people I really liked working with me, and the same thing in the next company. So after kind of 3 or 4 companies in a row of, plus the startup weekends, were feeling like I could just not just attract, but retain talented developers, I kind of said, you know what, I don't know what else I can do well, but I know I can do this part.
So did Startup Weekend, I'm just surprised. It's interesting that a lot of developers that I've met, they just want to develop. They don't want, if somebody points at them and says, you're a manager, they like the idea maybe of being a manager, but they don't want to be a manager. They just want to keep doing what they're doing. This is true of salespeople or anybody else. The greatest sales guy in the world, he always wants to be the VP of sales. Becomes the VP of sales, he becomes the best closer of everybody. He's not a manager. He's not developing people and all that. But you're different. This is, again, God-given sort of skill or interest, if you will. You said, you liked being a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an ambition that I think as soon as I realized it was available to me is when I started pursuing it. So I was, then that would have been high school.
Different than he pointed at you and said, you're a manager.
No, in high school, I became very ambitious. You wanted to be a leader. Since high school,
Tell me about that. Tell me about when that started. Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, to rewind one step behind, in middle and high school, I felt like, you never know how true this stuff is. I felt like I was tremendously unpopular. And maybe I was just hard on myself, or maybe people really didn't like me. I don't know. But in middle and high school, that started to shift. And my academics, I was a terrible student in elementary and middle school. And I started to become a good student just in time to get a good enough GPA to go to Georgia Tech. So I think when that academic performance thing was behind me, and when I started to find groups of people that I vibed with, I started to feel like there was the potential to, I think I admired the people who were 2 steps ahead of me and tried to learn from them. And that's always been kind of in my DNA. And so at Georgia Tech, that flourished tremendously. I mean, I went to Tech on a leadership scholarship.
You say they were 2 steps ahead of you, but 2 steps ahead of you in age, or 2 steps ahead of you in the position that they then hold?
Yeah, in the position, right? In the
position, okay.
Yeah. So even in high school, but especially once I got to Georgia Tech, I'd look at, you have your juniors, your seniors, the people who are ahead of you. And you say, well, what steps did they take to get where they are? And do I want to be there? And so I think that served me well. And that also served me weird when I got into the technology world, and I felt like I wasn't qualified to do the jobs yet. I felt I maybe held myself back a little bit there once I got into the workforce.
Tell me more about that. I don't know what you mean.
You go in, I joined Air2Web as a software developer, and I felt like I needed to be like a VP or a CTO before I was qualified to be entrepreneurial and to go raise money, right?
Okay. So how did it hold you back?
Because I kept on taking software developer gigs, and it really it took that unlocking of Startup Weekend and that compression of a few years to kind of unshackle the, you can do this, it's available to you right now.
One of the things that happens, I think, before we go to that one, I think one of the things that happens is you wind up joining organizations where there isn't somebody 2 steps ahead of you that you really respect.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not interested in developing anybody. So you can never really develop this sort of mentor-mentee type relationship. You look at them and you say, I don't want to be that person. I don't like the way he manages or she manages. Okay. I don't like the way they treat people. And then you're kind of stuck in that job, that you don't have this sort of icon that you can look to and say, oh, yeah, let me just kind of develop as they develop. You want to make sure you don't develop like they developed, and that's a bad way to get a career going. Did that happen for you? Did you find that you found yourself in sort of like I'm a developer and I'm sort of dead-ended, or I'm a manager and I'm still dead-ended because the guy 2 levels up is not interesting to me?
It's fascinating you bring that up. I mean, you're helping me realize something I don't know if I realized, because at AirToWeb, actually, the VP there was truly a model of the kind of leader that I wanted to be and still want to be. And that was a gentleman named Jeff Browning. And Jeff went on to be on the exec team of SecureWorks when they sold off to Dell, and just a wonderful, wonderful guy. The thing that changed there was they got acquired. And after, going from 40, 60 people up to 200 people, .com bust, layoffs back down to 40, 60 people. And then I think probably not a great acquisition. The wheels just kind of came off there. It wasn't a good place to work for that reason. But the next couple of gigs, you're exactly right. Well, I just said, well, I'll join another.
What about Jeff? What was so attractive about Jeff to you? I know,
I think a lot of
he plays a pretty big role. He's on the I team, the prayer team for High Tech Prayer Breakfast. Very active, heck of a guy. But yeah, so what was so attractive? Here you are, a young man. You see him. How much older is he than you?
That's a good question, and I've never fully done the math, but I would think it'd be easily like a good 20 years.
Okay, so here he is. So he's up ahead of you here, and you're looking at him, and there was something about him that lit you up and said, "I want to be that." Right? What was that? What was that? This is really cool. I think this is how we come around to defining or realizing who we are. It's kind of cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing I have to remind myself of this, and I probably need to remember it more. One thing he was always very good at was protecting the engineering organizations from the capitulations of the rest of the organization. It's not to say that the rest of the org is dysfunctional. It's just to say that engineers don't deal with uncertainty well. They require clarity and a certain amount of protection from what, I feel like I'm making fun of salespeople too much, which is hilarious because I basically am a salesperson right now. But, the creativity of a salesperson who's chasing an opportunity means you can pull your product in a whole bunch of different directions. And when you start to throw that at developers, they just kind of freak out. So he created just a calmness under the surface that allowed good engineering to take root instead of being pulled back and forth. So I think there's that piece of it. There was certainly, he's a UGA guy and as a Georgia Tech guy, I probably shouldn't respect his technology at all, but he just really held the engineering organization. There you just felt a respect for who the people were individually and in how he spoke to people. Okay. So that, and there's also just certainly a kindness there and a degree of character that's at a tremendously high level. So I did, I felt like he cared.
So he took care of you, he protected you and the work that you were doing, and he respected you.
Yeah, that's right.
All soft stuff, right? It's just really interesting that.
Yeah, he was not architecting things, right? That's the really interesting thing about it. He wasn't getting up on a whiteboard and saying, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this other thing. I'm going to write some code. And that's probably a good lesson eventually as well, is there's a level of leadership that is hard for some developers to do where you can't distract yourself with code anymore. Code is the lowest and least value rather than the highest and best value you can bring to an organization at some point. But it stands in tension with, you have to be knowledgeable enough that the people respect you still. That's the trick of it all. That is hard as a leader, but he held those things in healthy balance.
Well, what I think part of it, what it is that too, he understood who you guys were, right? Yeah. And how you operated, what you liked and what you didn't like. Okay. Environmentally. And, if I want to be respected, the way to be respected is I have to respect you first.
Yeah.
I can't just demand respect, and that's, we've seen that in politics and things, which doesn't go very, very well. We've seen it in leadership, which you were going to get to. You were saying this wasn't always the case. You didn't always have a Jeff Browning, and you were going to go to the next Yeah. What happened there? What came to mind? That story?
Yeah, I can kind of see the peak and the valleys, right? So I went from that, and I had two jobs that didn't feel like a good fit. And until this conversation, I never was really able to fully articulate it. But yeah, I went to this little startup that kind of also might have been a mob front. I don't really know. The money was all out of Chicago. I'm not sure we ever sold anything. I don't know what went on there. But there wasn't a clear set of technical leadership that I understood well. Mm-hmm. And then I spent my internship at Delta Airlines before Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A had a tremendous leadership culture. I appreciated it a lot. Delta kind of felt like a job. And I went into a company here called SP Richards, which is a very old and storied company in Atlanta. It's the oldest continuously operating company in Atlanta, apparently. Really? And they're a reseller.
What do they do?
They're a reseller. They are the second, they at least were the second largest reseller of office products in the United States. They are a part of Genuine Parts Company, whose largest holding is Napa Auto Parts. So I was just in the IT department there. IT was a cost center. Everybody was kind of fighting over territory instead of painting the vision of where to go. And it really took until that next step at Proficient Systems where, again, I had just two guys ahead of me that did that same good job of protecting the engineering organization. Those were the guys that gave me a shot to be a manager. And, that kind of set me back on the right path of technical leadership that I respected, looked up to, and could learn from.
And then you're 20 at that time, 27, 28?
I'm right going on 30, yeah.
Going on 30, yeah. So now you've gotten this sort of enough experience at this point to say, if I go to Startup Weekend, I'm not going to make a fool of myself, right? I'm confident enough in who I am and how business works and technology, and I understand sales a little bit. And, you've been around.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that stepping out point is so important because there's so many people that are so inside. They're so focused on being on these smart, like you said, maybe being part of Napa Auto Parts or being part of Delta or saying, yeah, we've got this idea and we want to start something. There's nothing there. There's no network on the other side. There's no understanding of how the world sort of operates, in a less structured environment. Startup Weekend was perfect. There's no structure. It's crazy, right? 120 people and the charge is all you guys who don't know each other come up with an idea for one product and build it and put a whole marketing plan around it, including a logo. And you go like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
No, that can't happen. But that was a big change for you. That was the beginning of you really being launched into being an entrepreneur.
That's right. Yeah.
What does it mean to you to be an entrepreneur? I hear that thought, I was talking to, I don't know who it was. I was talking to, they made a comment to me. They said, I went somewhere. It was like Georgia State or somewhere else. And, it was down at ATDC. And I asked somebody, I said to this guy, so, my name's Charlie. What's your name? Well, John. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Now it's sort of this identity, and when I grew up, it certainly wasn't that. I'm just wondering from where you stand, and you're 25 years younger than me. What does it mean when people say I'm an entrepreneur? And what do you think a real entrepreneur is? And I put the real as an adjective before it, just to.
Well, I'd hate to throw anybody under the bus as not being a real entrepreneur, but I think the core of it, what has always fascinated me about software in the first place, is this idea that with nothing more than a computer in front of you, you can make something that's valuable in the world. And I think this has been sort of echoed by, Paul Judge and Alan Nance in the Tech Square Labs world is, they kind of have this like make something from nothing idea.
Yeah.
And, obviously a very small something is not much of anything. So, but the idea of making a consequential product and business that matters to somebody in the world enough to sustain itself is, directionally, I think that's what I think of in in entrepreneurship, and you have to deliver at some point. If you keep on
making something, creating something from nothing, makes me an entrepreneur.
And it has to, something has to be.
I'm really just trying to sort of summarize for the audience here. Yeah. Versus, you get a guy who says, I started a business. I started a contract program, not a contract program, but I started a professional services business. I'm putting out programmers, right? I'm selling bodies by the hour, if you will. And I'm not directing those people. I'm selling them to Equifax, Coca-Cola, wherever, anybody that needs, staffing, if you will. Is that person an entrepreneur?
I think that they are. There is a question. I like to have a little bit more skin in the game, but that's a choice. That's a choice from strengths. One of my strengths is that I can get skin in the game. Some people's best that I'm not. I haven't the faintest idea, Charlie, how to walk into Equifax and get them to want 80 software developers. I don't know how to do that, right? But if somebody does, and that person, who I would say is an entrepreneur, can find those developers and make that client happy. And there's a reason that Equifax chooses that person instead of another person. Again, I don't know what it is because I can't go do that deal right now. But, there is a connecting of a need that is, in fulfilling that and creating that process, I think is still interesting. It's not my choice of business, but it's someone else's who, enjoys it. And so I would just say to play to the strengths is not, there's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong in, franchising, you're still taking a risk. You're still creating the operating business around the core. Is it more, if you're franchising a restaurant, that restaurant was not there and you have made it in this neighborhood where there was not a, let's say a chicken restaurant, let's say a burger joint, whatever it is, let's say a sandwich shop.
What if you just say, instead of like you started with, because you're a computer science major, right? So you're there in creating programming, or what if you said, I'm just thinking about this. If you said it a different way, they say, I can identify a problem and come up with a solution that people will pay for.
I dig it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a day in the past where I would have been a lot more.
You got to have the people who pay for it thing. Otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I don't know what you are. I mean, you're a researcher, I guess. I don't know what it is. Okay.
Well, I think that's what you worry about when you say I'm an entrepreneur. If you're the person who raises 10 rounds of funding and never delivers anything that people will pay for, eventually it's not going to work. And then you're not really, nobody's paying for it, right? It's a problem.
And that's what I think is when we look at, I just got a Tesla. Okay. And I did read the Elon Musk biography, which this was about probably 4 years ago. And even back then I said, I really want to support this guy. It's pretty interesting. But one thing that he has a nose for is he has a nose for solving a problem with technology, all right, that people will pay for. He really he's got this very commercial side to him. He doesn't do it because it's just fun and interesting. He wants this ultimate acceptance by the marketplace, which is the first ultimate acceptance is I want to invest in it. Okay. Because it seems like a good idea, all the way to I want to buy it. I want it. I want to own it. Okay. I want to enjoy this thing that you've created. I mean, that's the great feedback that he's looking for.
Yeah. And something interesting you see in the DNA of the business he starts as well now. I mean, maybe not with PayPal, but the current ones, quite often he's looking at markets where the government is part of his first customer. Yeah. Because if you look at the Tesla, you have the electric vehicle credit. If you look at SpaceX, the government's paying for all of that stuff.
Right.
You look at what he's trying to do with the Boring Company. He's directly targeting municipal governments to dig holes in the ground. And you look at the Solar City stuff. And again, so much. And some people will disparage him and say, oh, well, that's not real entrepreneurship. It's like, well, if he's going to dive into a market that's sleepy and not working and develop a hot product with a federal subsidy, that's a good business.
The problem is his ideas are so big and impact so many that the only place to get money that doesn't take massive amounts of equity if you could get that equity money, is government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it works. I'm invested in a company like that we really, that's why, well, I should just say the R&D that's being done at Georgia Tech and all that, it's all government funded stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody has to pay for it to get it sort of launched a little bit to it starts looking like has commercial viability. Yeah. And that is, I didn't realize that with him, but I appreciate you pointing that out. That's the first place that he actually goes. It really makes a lot of sense. Couldn't have done it without it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now, so what did you learn as you're going along? This is like, we're moving to, how did you get to this sweet spot that you're at? So you have you do early jobs early, like you're a newspaper, you're hawking Coca-Colas, as you're saying, at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers games. You eventually, Georgia Tech, you then get into businesses and you're trying to learn what it takes to be an entrepreneur. You then launch yourself from inside businesses on startup weekends so that you start meeting other people and you start seeing what it's like to work in a totally unstructured environment of creation of companies. Yeah. What's the next step, or what did you learn from all that about yourself and where you thought your next step needed to be?
I think it was a couple of steps of just, I was still waiting a lot on permission from others, right? Each of those stops, you're getting permission, whether it's permission from people to join your team at startup weekend, or, the next couple of steps for me were running the entire technology organization of early stage startups. So I was in a political technology company. I was in a kids gaming company as kind of that CTO slot, and even to an extent running product in the latter one. And I was still kind of getting permission, but it was at that point where I was like, okay, if I can do all of these things and get somebody to pay me money for what we make, then that's a business. And so I think that was the evolution of feeling like I could fully run a product and a product organization in a real company and not just on a startup weekend. That, I think, was the next step in understanding and freedom and capability, combined with, over all this time, the entire story of kind of my first 10 years out working is it keeps costing less to build more meaningful products. That's been true all along the way. The cost of, when we were in
that over and over again. But what about that? But what about this piece though, that I'm looking at that guy two steps ahead of me, that whole concept, and I'm learning. I'm always learning. I've got this sort of ambition, right? I'm looking to get there, but at some point, what I'm hearing from you is you get there.
Yeah.
Now I don't have that person within the organization that's 2 steps out. Maybe it's somebody 2 steps out that's outside of the organization.
That's right.
Did that transition happen for you?
Not entirely. When you're in that kind of number 2 seat, when you're in the exec suite but not the CEO kind of thing, there's just one person ahead of you. So you have to decide if you want to work for him, if you respect him, what you can learn from him, that sort of thing. But it did start to come
but that's what
untethered.
I'm saying. You hit that sort of dead end. You look and you go, instead of saying, hey, he's 2 steps ahead of me, I need to learn from him. He's 2 steps ahead of me. And you come to the conclusion, I could really run this better than him.
Yeah.
See, that's
in one case, yes. In one case, no.
Big switch in attitude, right? And that's what might get you saying it's time. That's what I'm trying to get to. I'm not sure if that happened to you. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, the time was being forced out of the nest, candidly. So the kids gaming company, I think we raised about, I'm guessing, I didn't see all the numbers, about $3 million into a online kids gaming company in Atlanta, which is in like 2009, which is an insane thing. That was just not common then. But that company ran out of money. And so when it ran out of money, we were able to transition most of the team over to a Facebook gaming studio that was being started here. And then they shut that thing down. And so I had been building the initial version of the Badgie product in the background. So I'd done startup weekend companies. I was like, I think I can pitch this. People will join it. Badgie was something I wanted to build for myself.
What was the name of that?
And Badgie.
Badgie. How do you spell that?
Badgy. Yeah.
Badgy. Okay.
I learned some lessons about branding and naming from that as well that I can share another time. But I've done every version of bad branding and naming, and we can talk about it all. But when they shut down the gaming studio, I just quit having a job after that. So I kind of kept working on the Badgie thing. I did a little bit of so that was, let's see. That was about, I was 33.
Were you married yet?
Yeah. Yeah. And we had one kid. And the second one was on the way somewhere in the middle of that. Yeah.
But this is like really young kids, right?
Yeah. Yeah. This is our youngest was like 1.
Okay. I just bring this up because a lot of times I get people who say, I'm married and I got kids. Is this a good time for me to start a company? Right. So here you are, you've got these little babies. And you got a marriage, a couple of years, so you build a relationship here. And what happens? You're unemployed. So what happens after that?
Yeah, it maybe wasn't a good time. And I've certainly learned some lessons from that as well. But I think it actually was a good time. And I could just share some lessons about things I mishandled during that time is probably a better thing to say than it was a bad time. But yeah, I quit having a job. I started doing a little bit of consulting. You can't
say stuff like that. Tip your hands on the lessons and not someone tell us what they are. Those are the really cool things that we want to learn about. By the way, I think it's a great time to start a company.
Yeah. No, the lesson I would say is just it's typically not worth it to go without income for 6 months. You should figure something else out instead of going without income and thinking something's going to come eventually. So to fast forward a little bit, and we'll probably wind it back, I started a company, believe in the vision, raise some money, run out of money, still believe in the vision, hope someone's going to come save you. And nobody's going to come save you. Like, you have to go save yourself, and dig your way back out. Like, nobody's just going to airdrop, a round of funding or a pile of customers, or something. It has to be earned at each step. I mean, maybe somebody gets super lucky, but
Where did you come up with the idea that somebody might save you?
I don't know. It was hope, right? Hope is not a strategy, but it was my strategy for a time until I realized it needed to be otherwise. So
I never heard second half of that year, I've never heard anybody say that.
What?
That I started this company, I didn't have income, but I knew that someone would save me.
No, I hoped that somebody would. And I did that. We had already raised our seed money.
That's what I meant to say. I hope I've just never heard anybody say that. It's interesting that you had that in the back of your mind so if I just keep doing what I'm doing, someone's just going to sort of show up.
If I keep doing what I'm doing, that magical customer I've almost had will happen, and they'll get another and another, and it'll be a good business. Or, these investor conversations I've been having, one of them's going to tip over and we're going to raise another round of funding. I had all these things that you hope and you think are almost going to happen, and it wasn't a good strategy, obviously.
So when did you come to the realization that this is not a good strategy? Was it your wife that told you, Rob, we have kids, we need money?
Well, it was
a lot of times that happens. I mean, you could have a wife. I mean, that's why God puts us with partners like that, is to speak truth into our life.
I mean, she probably tried in her own way on more than one occasion, but I probably didn't listen right for a while. And so I think it was my idea. It was probably her idea. 6 months of no income. I'm like, I don't care whether or not this business is going to work the way I think it is. There's some other business available to us, and it was more services work. It was, you're not supposed to do that when you raise money into a SaaS company. You're not supposed to do consulting work. I just said, forget it. I'm going to do the consulting work too. And the second half of the year, first half of the year, no income. Second half of the year, got a year's worth of income in the second half of the year. So made up all those 6 months I didn't pay myself.
How did people find you? How did you get that services work going? Because I'm down on my product, right? I'm on Badgie. I'm doing this product development. I'm talking to customers that I think want to buy this product. But people are coming to you, obviously, saying, hey, would you do this for me?
Yeah. I need to figure out
No, that has nothing to do with Badgie. I'm not going to do that, right?
I need to go recall for myself who those anchor customers were. I want to say it was just through the network. And one of those early customers was actually a referral from a friend who I met at that first startup weekend. It was, hey, I know this guy. He has the software platform he's built to run his business, and he needs some more help. Do you want to work on it? And I said, well, sure. And that was one of them. A couple of one of the marketing agencies I worked with when I first quit having a job came back to me with some more work as well. And I seem to recall that was a pretty anchor client for us. Was, they were just short on developers. They had some client work. We actually, this is a minor rabbit trail. We built a custom case builder for Casemate. So the phone case company that's here. And so you could actually connect your Facebook and your Instagram to this Flash-based web tool and put your photos on your case. And so it is all connected, right? The reason they came to me is that the Badgey product was built on connecting into social networks. And so they had this need to build something that connected into social networks. So people know it was through networks, but it was people knowing
people didn't
what the brand was.
Yeah, people didn't want to spend money on Badgey, but they liked the idea that you had developed expertise in a particular area and you can help them with their problem that had nothing to do with Badgey.
Yep. That's right.
Now, the other piece of this thing, which is pretty exciting, is that, again, people are recognizing you for your expertise and your leadership. Secondly, is you were in the network at that point. Yeah. You were outside of the inside of one company. You were out there and you were running around. You were very visible at ATDC, ATV. You're out there. And then thirdly, they recognize you for this expertise that you had, which was, I understand developers.
Yeah.
I understand developing and I understand developers, right?
Yeah.
These things are starting to come together. I can't tell you how many people I talk to and I say, they go I'm just not growing this thing fast enough. I said, well, is anybody buying from you now? And the answer usually comes out well, yeah, these people want me to do this programming for them or whatever, or these people want me to build a product that does this and they'll pay me for it, but that's not what I want to do. And I'm like, wait a minute. The market's talking to you and telling you where they see your value. How do you say no to that?
Right. I did for a long while, right? We did, after we quit being broke, right? We raised the money, we spent the money, we had no money. And then I insisted for probably another 2 years to run the business at kind of break even. And by break even, to be clear, I mean taking home a meaningful but not exorbitant salary, right? I was not on ramen budget here, but I insisted on running the consulting at just a high enough level to sustain. And I didn't ever let it get bigger than that for at least a couple of years.
And a meaningful salary to you back then was?
I think I had this it should be six figures of some sort, right? So it's not it's not what I was making when I was an executive producer of a game.
That's what I mean. So it was $8,000 a month or $10,000 a month, or
Yeah, it was below market value. I took below market value for
So what you're doing is I'm doing services so that I can get a living wage and then push as much money as I can into the product again.
Right. It was a funding strategy. It was an alternate funding strategy for sure.
Exactly. Okay. So then what happened with that?
What happened is I made a decision.
Moving along this path of Eureka, I found it, right? That's where we're headed here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a couple of years ago, I realized I wasn't really interested probably ever in getting back on the funding treadmill. I just didn't ever see myself feeling gifted or interested in assembling the plan that is required and the momentum required in a business, and to play the tactics there to go to an investor and ask them to put money in. I didn't really want to take any more dilution into the company. And
wait a second. So you raised money.
Yeah.
You didn't tell me you raised money.
I mentioned it a brief in passing, right? So
so tell me about that experience of raising money, and so that I understand better how you kind of came to the conclusion that this is so distasteful for me that I just don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, I think I basically got stupendously lucky at the accelerator money that we raised and then the seed funding that we raised. So I had no job and I was consulting a little bit and I was building this Badgie product on the side. And I applied to the first cohort of the Flashpoint Accelerator. So Flashpoint was funded out of Georgia Tech at a time when you could look around, you could see Techstars, you could see Y Combinator, but they weren't here. Y Combinator wasn't here, and the classes were still kind of small. They're huge now. Techstars eventually came here, but wasn't here yet.
Right.
And Atlanta Tech Village and Atlanta Ventures in the David Cummings world wasn't here either. And so Flashpoint, I was like, this is really cool. I was looking for someone else to give me permission to have a company. I was. But I applied and I interviewed.
And you needed that permission because
of myself, because of my own insecurities, right? I needed to be validated still, I think, in a way to tell me I could start a company and it was worth it for me. So I interviewed with Merrick first.
Does that mean that your experience is the same as anybody else's experience that really wants to get into their own thing? That they actually do need that validation, but seldom ever get it?
That certainly may be true, or maybe I just take certain things as validation that are much smaller. Like maybe I just need this much encouragement to feel validated. I don't know.
No, because when you said that made sense for me because I didn't. Yeah. I felt like I needed somebody to tell me. You know, you should. You'd be good at that. When I talk to people about stepping out, sort of, they would always say, "No, that's not really you. You're a this. So you should just do this, whatever this is. Okay, you run companies. Yeah. You should just do that." And I'm like, "But I'm not happy running companies. But that's what you do, and you do it well. You should just do that." I'm like, "I don't want to do that." Well, what do you want to do? Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about stepping out and being maybe an angel investor or a private equity guy or something. And they're like, "That's not you." I still remember a guy telling me that in harsh terms. So it took me years to come around to, but my heart tells me it's me.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like what they were kind of saying is you are not their conception of an angel investor, but you still took it upon yourself to become your version of an angel investor.
Yeah, but you don't do it with that endorsement that you're talking about, that encouragement, if you will. You have to, it's almost to break through. You have to just say, "Look, my heart says this, you say that. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I just have to do it."
Yeah. And I think maybe part of where I end up getting the validation is just from taking enough chances. Like, some people have joked, this is not my lane in the world. Some people say if you walk up to 100 girls on the street and ask them out, like one of them's going to say yes, right? And that's been kind of my journey in business. Is I've just taken enough shots on goal that maybe I might not be very good sometimes, but I'm stubborn enough that eventually something breaks through.
But this is why I was so interested in talking to you on this show, is because there are a lot of people like you, and they keep taking shots on goal. Some of them just quit. And then they wind up in a company. But I just saw you and I said, this guy, he's not quitting. And now you seem to be at peace. Like, okay, I kind of found this and it's working for me and I'm enjoying it. Okay. Which is really great. So
the business fits now. It does. It's aligned with who I am.
That is cool. And who doesn't want to achieve that? Everybody wants it. Everybody wants it.
A lot of people wouldn't have a job if they could find that.
Yeah, but you were listening to a lot of people to tell you what the business needed to look like and who you needed to be, really, for it all to fit together, as opposed to saying, here's who I am and here's the kind of business and this is a fit, versus here's the kind of business you want and you need to be this other kind of person that's not you. And then it makes for a fit. You went through that through your 30s.
Yeah. Yeah. It took me a long while, right? Because I went through the Flashpoint Accelerator, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
And everything in that is aligned towards you getting up on stage at the end and doing a little song and dance with your pitch deck and somebody giving you money. And we flew out to New York and San Francisco to pitch investors.
Yeah.
And, we did all that. And I was still on that mission. I was still trying to be that person coming out of Flashpoint. And that was after being, I applied to Techstars, I applied to Y Combinator, rejected by those, but did Flashpoint. And I was still trying to be that person coming out of Flashpoint.
And you were that person because you want to be that person because everybody around you that you hung with was wanting to be that person?
Yeah, and some of them were that person, right? I mean, I was in Flashpoint with David Moeller, who exited CodeGuard, with Vijay, who has, Pin Drop Security still running. Like, there were some Adam Getty and Ionic Security. Like, that was an awesome group of people.
That is an awesome
part of me is like,
people. Yeah.
And so, again, I'm on the short bus here, and I'm the one that didn't do any of those things. And so it is like,
did you know when you were there that it wasn't you?
No, because we went out and raised more money. So, the accelerator round at the time was like $25,000. And I've told the story a few times. I'll tell as much of it or as little of it as you want to share here. But I ended up, after that Flashpoint accelerator, my wife sent me off to the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl was in Indianapolis. I was from Indiana and I liked football. And she liked me enough to get all of my family to pitch in and give me enough money to go buy a ticket to the Super Bowl, fly up there and stay up there.
Okay.
And I'm on the plane. I'm like looking at Twitter. I land. I go to Startup America, which was started by Scott Case, founding CTO of Priceline. Mm-hmm. Scott had this pitch competition at a local kind of co-working space. And somebody there says, I talked to Scott, and he's good people. And someone there says, hey, we're having a Shark Tank watching party. We invited Mark Cuban. Do you want to come? I had nothing better to do. I could go to Buffalo Wild Wing and drink beer with a bunch of Patriots and Giants fans, but that's not how I think about pursuing the opportunities, right? I like to stick myself out there, get in the community, and see what happens. And so I had seen actually on the plane, Mark went to Indiana University. After Startup Weekend, I put myself out there a lot, right? I was kind of out in the mix, and let's see what happens.
So you start uncomfortable, and then it becomes normal operating procedures.
Yeah. And some of that even in Georgia Tech, right? Even in kind of growing in leadership at Georgia Tech, there was, I won't go deep into this. My third year at school, after I finally got my academics back on track, after I had a bunch of other things going on, I said to myself, well, why don't I walk on the football team? And so for one spring, I'm getting a computer engineering degree. I'm in student government. I'm in interfraternity council. And I say, well, why don't I also try out for the football team? And I was too busy. I quit, but I didn't wait for somebody to ask me.
You tried out for the football team.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I'm up in Indianapolis. I go to this Shark Tank watching party, and Mark Cuban shows up. And so I'm not saying I was at my best. I think my pitch at Flashpoint, from the feedback I've received, was pretty terrible. I accept that. It probably was. Again, it's not something I want to develop as a skill. But I kind of told Mark, so first of all, the two people that won the pitch competition were talking to Mark first. Like, Scott Case was there. He put him in touch. He's like, hey, talk to Mark. One of the guys raised money from him later. And then Mark's sitting there and nobody's talking to him. So again, you just talk about taking your shots. And I say, hey, Mark, can I get your feedback on my business? He says, sure. Like, nobody's talking to the guy. There's 40 people there. And nobody wants to talk to Mark Cuban. So, and the worst case scenario is if I'm a total idiot, he'll memorably remember me. But the likely scenario is that he's going to forget me. Like, that's the worst case scenario, is he's going to be like, man, that was a waste of 5 minutes, and forget me. But I talked to him. I said, here's what we're doing with this badgie thing. Here's the proof that we have. We had Quilted Northern as a paid pilot customer. What do you think? And he said, kind of picked at it a little bit, asked you shortcuts for those angel investor questions. And he says, I want you to follow up with me. Here's my email. And ran into him again the next night, crashing his party. And he said, no, really, I want to talk to you, and follow up with me.
So what happened?
So that was the seed round. We, kind of back and forth for a couple of months. I learned a variety of things about being stupid and overly verbose in emails. And Merrick First, who ran Flashpoint, was really, really helpful and came alongside me and helped me get the deal back on track. Got some local investors involved as well. And yeah, that became the seed round for Badgie.
Okay. Tell me that. I want to go down another level deeper here, because you said something that's interesting and should be taken on board from a lot of these entrepreneurs. You said, I learned to not be stupid and be so terribly verbose in emails. Yeah. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to smart people, which sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, there's this concept of mirroring in conversation where most people respond best when you talk to them in the same style that they're talking to you. And sometimes people will even say to go so far as to, mimic people's habits. I could put my hand up towards my neck as you are right now.
Yeah.
And if I weren't saying something about it, you might not even notice that I did that. But many people will say it increases likability. But over email, I think it's simply, if someone's being formal, if they're being casual, if they're saying a lot, if they're saying a little, read the dang room. So what Mark was doing was sending like 1 sentence blurbs back at me. And I was sending him a paragraph. And I learned to treat it. I was swinging for the fences, grand slam baseball, and I should have been playing ping pong. Like, Mark's a ping pong guy. If anybody's listening and they want to talk to Mark, ask him one question at a time. Don't ask him 5. If you ask him 3 questions, he's only going to answer 1. So stop asking 3 questions. And, Merrick helped me with that very obvious bit of things and how to kind of rebait the hook for the investment round. And it served me well ever since, is to think about how am I being contacted?
As an investor over these, it's almost 30 years now, I have run into this. I can't tell you how many times. It's like people send you 6-8 paragraphs on their company. And they attach, 5, their PowerPoint slides, their financial statements. And this is the first thing that comes in. And then they call you and they're or send you a follow-up email. Did you review it? I mean, I don't even know you. Why should I invest all this time into this thing? This is ridiculous. Yeah. How about we start with hello? You see? Yeah. And I'm one of these that ask really pointed questions and I want pointed answers. So when I ask you a pointed question, I don't want a 30-minute answer that has all of this background around it, because I lose interest in it and I just really want to go away. You're somebody I don't like after a while, right? But they keep sending this amazing amount of detail. So it's great that you mentioned this. I never had somebody explain it so well. That watch and observe how the person you're talking to speaks.
Yeah.
And sort of take that cue to say, this is how they like to talk to each other. That's really good. That's really good. People should, if they learn anything from this, that's a good thing to learn as an entrepreneur.
That's also the free tip for anybody who wants to pitch Mark Cuban. I actually have had a couple people ask me, and some of them have listened and some of them hadn't. And I'm not saying I'm always right, but a couple of folks that have listened have raised some money. The idea still had to be decent, but they listened on just money keeping it tight.
Him. And that first meeting with him that you had where he was sitting all alone, you said, I'm going to be with him for 5 minutes. So you got to the point quickly. You didn't. Yeah. Well, you weren't verbose in that meeting. Otherwise, he would have never talked to you again.
Yeah. And I asked for advice, not money. Right.
Yep. There you go. That's the other one. Right.
Can you give me feedback on my business?
Did you learn that from Flashpoint?
I don't think so. I think that was just one of those kind of, you listen to smart people who talk about persuasion and all this other stuff. And I think at that point, I had heard the adage of, you ask for money, you get advice, you ask for advice, you get money. Like I had heard that before. And, that's probably, there's probably a limit to the truth of that, but it's directionally, I think, very useful.
I love that. So then you raised money from him.
Yeah.
And then, so what happened? So now you've got Flashpoint money of $25,000. Is that what that was? And now how much did you raise from him?
It turned out to be, the total round was about 300.
Okay.
Or maybe 340. But it's memorable because it was his piece was going to be $500K, but it was tranched. And, I have there's a whole conversation to be had about tranche funding. I've had a variety of broken dreams in multiple companies off of tranche funding. I would probably generally not. So you know, but you're doing it for the audience, I think here. So tranching, you're splitting the funding into multiple pieces, sometimes based on some conditions and sometimes not. Right. So in one company I was in, we had an investor tranche the money, and it was based on a certain amount of a particular type of revenue. Like, we want so many people, let's say it's on an annual plan, by this time, or else we'll give you the rest of the money if you hit that goal. Right. And what was interesting in that case is it actually tied our hands on the strategy. So we actually had a business conviction that it was better to have monthly revenue than to have annual revenue. And so we have this divergence in incentives now. The best thing for the business is to go over here. The best thing for the funding is to go over there towards the annual plans. Right. And so in this case, the second tranche was just based on whether they felt like it. And I grilled them on a little bit because I had bad tranched funding experiences. And they said, well, we usually fund it. I said, okay, well, I usually fund it. So when we talked about hoping things would turn around, that was part of the hope, was like, hey, you said there was the second stack of money here. Can we have it? And they're like, no, you don't have a good enough business. My conclusion on tranche funding now, and the reason I don't like it now, is it typically ends up being one of two things, right? It's either you have that hope and it's not going to come to pass, or if it does come to pass, you're usually giving a discount on a future round of funding. You're basically locking in a price that if things go extremely well, it's still the price you had when you raised the money. So it feels to me now like you're giving a little bit of a future discount on progress in the business.
I think that's
you should just raise more money insight at that point.
That's a great insight. You know, I wasn't much for tranche funding, as you call it, but I was when I talk to entrepreneurs. I do talk about different rounds and milestone funding, but they're different rounds. Yeah. So if I do that seed funding, look, to get out of seed funding, okay, and get to a Series A, you know, you're going to need this kind of revenue and these kind of customers and this kind of product development. Okay, fine. So when I get to that, I know that now I'm in an upscale, right, as far as my valuation goes, or an uplift in my valuation. But yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I call it milestone funding, but tranche funding on an original round is that's a tough one. That's almost like accounts receivable financing, right? You know, I'll get more money as my accounts receivable goes up. Okay.
Right.
You know, kind of works against you.
Yeah.
All right. So where were we?
We raised some money, and we were also a little bit ahead of that of talking about kind of turning the corner from, you know, being out of money to not being out of money and actually starting a business and not starting it, right? Did he
tranche fund you, by the way?
He did, yeah.
Oh, he did tranche fund you.
Well, he didn't fund the second tranche, but he made a term sheet on terms that involved a second tranche.
I see. Okay.
So there was another 250 for us if we, you know, did a great job.
And it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. No, I was learning. I was building a marketing tech product, and I didn't really understand marketing tech yet. I've learned a lot about it since then.
When I talked to you, you sounded like you really did understand it, but I didn't know marketing tech anyway. So when you talked, I was like, oh my God, he's an expert. I remember where we were standing. What was that? I can't remember what the name of those guys that were running the plumbing supply company. What was the name of that place?
Oh yeah. Hippopotamus with Kevin and Heath. Yeah. Yeah, and Ashish was tied up in that. Ashish Mystery was also part of that core. It was Kevin and Heath and Ashish that put Hype together.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know Ashish was in that deal. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where I remember us having a long conversation in your office there. But go ahead. Yeah, so you didn't know much about MarTech, but here you are in MarTech.
Yeah, and learned a lot, but didn't learn enough to put a product into the market that that people wanted.
Did Mark Cuban, so he had how much money tied up in it before he said, I'm not putting another dime in?
He had 250 in.
Okay. So he does get to a point where he says, because this is from an investor standpoint, it's the hardest thing in the world. When do you say, I'm not doing this anymore? And once you have 250 and you go like, man, if they just change these three things, I'll put another 150 towards that. And before you know it, you're 600,000-700,000 into something that wasn't going to work at 250. It's not going to work any better at 650, you see?
Yeah. Well, and if I were criticizing myself, I'd say I probably didn't deploy the capital quickly enough. I was probably a little bit conservative in how I spent it. So there was actually more, I didn't bring in enough people with skills that were different from mine.
Okay.
So I brought in, with great conviction, I brought in a CTO that I'd known for quite a while to ensure that he was building the technology and I was not. That was table stakes for me. Was I need to take my hands off the keyboard and I need to focus on understanding the market and selling. That was evident to me. But we didn't hire anybody else in. So it was just me trying to figure out sales, marketing, biz dev, whatever, and MarTech, and then directing what product we built behind the scenes. So I do think there's a different reality where if we had deployed that capital more quickly, then we could have gotten to the second tranche. But because we kind of nursed it out over a year, I think it was more evident we'd given ourselves less of a chance to succeed. And there was also more evidence that it wasn't.
Yeah, but you learned something
maybe going to work
too. The other piece is what you said is I stayed at the keyboard as part of that, right? So I stayed.
Well, I did take my hands off the keyboard. I took my hands off the keyboard. That was maybe the only thing I did right.
You did.
I did take my hands off the keyboard. Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were saying, because I find in a lot of cases that the best salesman, if the guy that starts it as a salesman, okay, he stays as a salesman. He's the number one guy, right? I mean, you never get out of this sort of grind that you're in. You never build an organization. And you're saying, but you said you didn't hire people fast enough that were outside of your expertise.
Yeah.
So you were just hiring programmers. So you were just constantly, the answer is going to be, if I build it, they will come.
That's right. And I can learn the rest. I can learn the rest from selling the product, marketing it, all those things.
What did you learn from that?
I mean, I think I largely learned.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, my wife asked me this the other day. She said, because I always told her within the business, one of the things I learned when we flipped into the Converge product instead of the Badgie product, when we got into Converge, my statement to my wife was, well, when we get to parts of the sales process, I'm going to hire for that now. And so top of the funnel, widespread outreach to marketing agencies, which were the client for that product.
Yeah.
I hired for that. But I think the lesson I learned even one step down from that was, I don't know if I'm a high scale SaaS product salesman. I've always been most comfortable. Even now, I feel most comfortable in a consultative.
But it's like you haven't given it up, though. In other words, I don't know if I'm that. Do you know, but you're afraid to say it? Do you know that you're not afraid to say it?
I would say I'm pretty sure that I'm not, and I'm probably not going to try. Like, is it something I would be interested in cultivating intellectually? Yes, but do I find it more engaging to look somebody in the eye, talk to them about what they want to see exist in the world, and help them do that and earn trust that way? That's more natural to me. It is not natural to me to hop on a demo call and try and diagnose their needs and try and align my product to it. Like, I understand it and I have all the respect in the world for the people who love it. And it's incredibly important
you say it's, can I learn it? Can I do it? It's when we get to a certain age, okay, I say when we're in an early age, okay, I'm talking right out of Georgia Tech, I can go in a lot of different areas, okay? As I gather experience and work with different types of people in different functional areas, I do get to a point where I have to respect what you call my natural interests, if you will. I'll call them that, natural interests. I'm drawn to this particular area, okay, because that's where your fulfillment and happiness is, and that's where your effectiveness is, so it's okay to say, I'm not that.
Yeah.
Does that mean I could never do that? No, I could do it, but I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much as what I'm doing. So therefore, I'm not that, because there is somebody who loves that.
Right.
My son is in that side, my younger son. He thinks it's the greatest thing in the world. And he's making cold calls like through the roof and talking to people all day long on these SaaS type sales. And I think it's great that he loves that. That's just not who Rob is. Okay. And it's okay.
That's right. Yeah.
What is it? There's a lesson, I know you're a Christian. Here we are. Paul talks about the body of Christ, and he makes the comment, if every part of the body was an eye, it wouldn't function very well, if it was just an ear. Yep. It takes all these pieces to make for a good company, to make for a good society. We can't all be scientists, It's just the way it works. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how we don't want to say, I'm not that. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Well, then you have to state what you are. And then there comes with the whole batch of insecurity about whether you're right about that. I'm pretty confident that I'm in the right spot now.
When you told me what you are.
Yeah.
You said I could look somebody. You said it so full of confidence and so slowly. Yeah. You said, I can look somebody in the eye, right? And you went on from there. Yeah. That was just like, God, that was great. Tell me what that turned out to be and I can build it. Yeah. And it was like, I'm good at that.
Yeah. Which was always the truth of the other companies, right? When I was at Perficient, when I was in the kids game, when I was in the political tech, it was like, what needs to be built? I'll understand the business side of it. I'll understand, we have a core value in empathy, right? And I'm going to understand why this needs to exist in the world. I'm going to assemble the team to do it, and we're going to deliver. And that was the extracted truth. And so what I was trying to do in building Badgie and building Converge, I was trying to earn the opportunity to build that organization by creating this construct around it. I said, well, if I can build a SaaS product and a sales organization to drive growth, then I will earn the opportunity to do what I'm good at, which is building the organization to deliver that product and understanding what clients need. But I didn't have clarity about what the clients needed enough to build it to drive the revenue. And so it just kind of was stuck in neutral the whole time.
And so now you made a comment, and we went through this whole thing about raising money, and you said, I know I don't want to do that anymore. So then pick up from there.
Yeah, what I wanted to do from there, I certainly recall there was a specific moment where I knew, because I told you I had been managing the revenue to be just enough to fund the ongoing development of Converge as the product. Badgie had been sunset and all that sort of thing. And there was a moment where I just said, what would it look like to stop saying no and just to start saying yes when someone came to me and said, hey, we want this technology built? And what would it look like just to keep saying yes? And the time since then has been an experiment in what it looks like to keep saying yes.
How long have you been saying yes?
It's been about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years.
And when you say
really 2 years,
to clarify for the audience, you mean to people coming to you and
That's
asking for this development services.
Instead of saying either no, I'm too busy, or the other thing I would often do is I would be too busy, like working on the business, that I would be slow in responding to someone and disqualify myself because it was obvious that I wasn't a good partner. And so either by being busy or by not responding, we weren't growing in that area because I wasn't open to it.
Yeah. And so what's this last year and a half taught you about yourself?
Number one, it's given me tremendous clarity, because I can tell you the things that I want to be doing in this business, right? I can tell you that what I want to be doing is I want to be out talking to people about the software they want built and why. I want to land that in a way that's clear for a development team to build it. And I want to build a company and a process that is good at hiring software developers to do it. And that latter part, I would say for now, that still looks like me being very involved in the recruitment of software developers, but I also recognize that that's one of those hats that's going to have to come off sooner, because the first one, I mean, just in general, and I think the thing that the CEOs that I worked with saw and felt in me was that I could earn trust to deliver the product, and they didn't have to stay up at night wondering if it was going to get delivered. And so that, and being the person with a software developer mindset who wants to go out and understand the business and digest it into what needs to be built, that's going to be rarer, I think, than having software developers that can hire other software developers. Right. That's a process, and having good people. And again, going back to like Jeff Browning days, building an organization that protects them and keeps them isolated from the capitulations of what, the business side is asking for. So, basically, how do I set the vision? How do I go out there and, to a large extent, talk to the network I already have? But, it's also at this weird point where I don't even fully understand how this worked. 2 weeks ago, this lady submits a form on our website. I get on a couple of calls with her and, write her up a quote. And she's like, well, let's go. It's a product that'll take 1,000 hours of developer time to build.
What's really interesting, though, is you, for the first time, instead of having people like Merrick First, okay, or name the person, okay, that's actually telling you, here's what your next steps are, and here's what you need to do, and here's how you build this company. You have actually forward vision as to what needs to happen to build this company. And it's coming your way. You feel like you're being pulled along as opposed to pushing all the time. It's just happening. And so you've matured to a point where you're settled with heart of hearts who Rob is, what Rob's good at, and the market recognizes that and says, yeah, now I'm in alignment not only with my company, but I'm in alignment also with this third piece, which is the market. It all sort of flows together, and we all have momentum at the same time. It really is nice to see that you've gotten to this point.
It's enjoyable, and some of that has come, it's come through peers and through coaching as well, right? So even as soon as I recognized that we had kind of a business, I jumped into some peer accountability groups. And then when COVID kind of really, really hit, we had already started saying yes to people who were just like, can you build this thing? Sure. We had one a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said, I want a developer for 1.5 years to do X. And at first I was like, I don't know who that is. And then we figured out how to say yes, and we figured out how to get them a developer for 1.5 years to do X. So I'd already started saying yes. We had already made our first hire from new revenue, right, when the pandemic hit. So we hired a guy, Georgia Tech guy who lives down in Santiago, right before COVID. So we'd already started this more of a growth mindset, more of, okay, the market is here for us. Well, there's going to be work to go for a long time. How do I build the team we need to do that? We had started that, but COVID hit. I quit doing these Zoom accountability groups pretty quickly, and I hired a coach directly. And that was helpful in getting me to understand and admit that there is a market pull, like that the world is pulling on us and asking us to do more of what we're doing, and we need to act accordingly.
What does act accordingly mean in that regard? Now that you have this, there is market pull. How do you act accordingly when there's market pull, except to be available for it?
Yeah, step one was really articulating what it is that we wanted to do, right? I needed to get more clarity around it, and so it came into distilling my feelings and instincts into an actual kind of mission, right? And so we clarified that into that we want to be known as the best partner to build and scale software products. And so there's a lot of subtleties in there. You kind of alluded to earlier that there are people who will go out and sell 80 seats of software developers, and they're selling, in some cases it's a quantity, not an outcome, right? And we want the outcome of a delivered product. And so if someone wants to buy and sell hours, that's not our primary focus.
Right.
There is and if we want to be, we talk about this internally.
Tell me what I can help you build that you want built.
Yeah.
Right. That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
I don't have a stable of great programmers, that you can direct in any way that you want.
Right.
Because what my value add is, I know how to protect these guys. I know what they're looking for. So you tell me what you're interested in, I'll see if I'm a match for you with my team.
Yeah.
That's really what you're at. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
and so acting accordingly and part of that. Go ahead.
Why did you think at one point that you needed to join this Zoom accountability groups? Where did all that come from? Because a lot of guys that are computer science majors, it's like, I know best, right? I just kind of stay in my space and I think my way through it because I'm Georgia Tech guy and I'm a smart guy, so I can figure it out.
Yeah. Some of that was...
Who wants accountability? That sounds awesome. That sounds very intimidating to me.
Well, so part one on that, I would say, is it's accountability to whom, right? And the best coaching and the best accountability groups to me are accountability to yourself, facilitated by someone else. And so accountability to someone else, like we do owe that, right? We have to own our commitments to our clients and all of those things, but that's accountability that the market requires of you. Yep. The accountability to yourself is usually, when you have the conviction to say you're going to do something, how do you make sure you're going to follow through and do it? Now, the other piece of why we did that was to an extent, I think I was looking for those people ahead of me again. And so once we even crossed, 250K in revenue, that qualifies you for EO's accelerator program. The implication is there are people who are in full-on entrepreneurs organization, EO, at $1 million plus in revenue, who are a couple steps ahead of you, and you also get to learn from them. So I think I wanted...
What's EO? People don't know what that is.
Entrepreneurs organization. So It's an international organization with local chapters, and membership in the U.S. is based on having over $1 million in trailing 12-month revenue.
Got it. Okay. And that puts you into now these are entrepreneurs. So now you're talking about business leaders, okay, or creators, if you will, right? So you want to be in that group because you are who you hang with.
Yeah, you are who you hang with. There is one thing I appreciate about how they operate is sometimes you need somebody to tell you what to do. Every once in a while, we have investors, actually, half of our local investors have run and sold multiple marketing agencies, multiple services organizations. So it's really helpful to have guys like Jeff Hillemeyer and Raghu Kakarala and Raj Chowdhury who are out there, like they can tell me what to do. When I need to go what to do, they will tell me. Sometimes my coach will tell me what to do. But in entrepreneurs organization, you don't tell each other what to do. You share your experiences and you allow the person listening to digest it and decide how that applies to their situation. And it's very healthy because you can be more open. When somebody tells you what to do, you start to shut down sometimes, unless you really respect them.
Yeah, right. Because what you really want is a conversation. You really don't want directives, right? And a lot of us are solution-oriented people as business people.
Yeah.
Say, let me tell you what you should do. That's my bad rap. People say that. I used to have a friend. He says, Charlie Paparelli says, let me tell you what you should do.
Yeah. This is also good advice for marriage, I'm told. Not jump into solution mode too quickly.
But was this accountability group that was over Zoom, was this EO or was this something else?
Yeah, it was EO that I had been doing Accelerator in person. And then we switched over to Zoom. And it's a 4-hour meeting every month just sitting on Zoom. And I had a lot of other Zoom meetings popping up. And I just bailed out and I said, I don't need a 4-hour Zoom meeting, but I need accountability. So let me go explore this coach thing. I ask people. So
who do you ask?
I ask my investors and my advisors. I said, who do you know? And remarkably, 3 different groups of people pointed to the same person independently. So Bob Lewis, do you know Bob?
Oh, yeah. He's going to be on my show here on October 15th.
Well, people should stay tuned for that one. I think what really sold it for me with Bob is, I talked to him first of all, and he's great, but you need outside validation. And I talked to one guy who was literally, I don't know why he would do this. He was a coach in a box. Like he got certified on some coaching program and he literally mailed me a box of collateral on his coaching program. And I was like, I don't know. Like, are you just going to teach me from a box? What's going on here? But, I asked Bob, like, what kinds of companies do you work with? And he gave me a rundown. And the rundown included SalesLoft, And I'm like, well, I know Kyle and I know that organization. And, Kyle and I, suffice it to say, at a small level, we are quite different people. I have a tremendous respect for him, but he's a totally different personality from me. And so if that were the only data point, I would say, well, I don't know. But then he's like, well, I work with CallRail. And so I've known Andy Powell for a good long time too. I knew Andy when it was 9 guys. No, I didn't know when it was. I actually met him when he was just doing his BMW reference site, bimmershops.com, before the whole CallRail thing. But Andy is very much that, that Georgia Tech engineer, that driven culture sort of thing. And then Jeff Graham. I don't know if you know Jeff. Jeff's a wonderful guy.
Jeff, I don't know.
Jeff bootstrapped a business called Guild Quality. And Guild Quality was, I believe, I might get it wrong, software for high-end home builders to run their business.
Okay.
And so he bootstrapped that thing up to, I think, probably 60 plus people and exited it. And he's like big old beard and just a salt of the earth kind of guy. No nonsense, very like, just like quote Seneca and, all that sort of thing. To talk to a coach who had good references from 3 such different guys really just had me say, okay, like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what this looks like, but I have to respect what this coach is doing. It helped me. I think if I had talked to a coach who just worked with people like me, I think I could have looked at that too and said, this could be a good fit. But for someone who had such a range.
What was the pleasant surprise of a coach, and what was something that was not so pleasant? And this isn't a reflection on Bob Lewis. I'm really asking you as just as somebody who's receiving the service, of any coach, really, because we have one idea of what it's going to be like, and then some other things come up, and you go like, "Well, I don't know that I like that so much." So the good and bad of working with a coach is, I guess, what your experience.
Yeah, I think it's kind of both the best and the worst at the same time.
Okay.
Is when they force you to do the work of setting the vision and making the changes that are needed in the business. They sort of like, they have good systems, but the systems are kind of interchangeable, right? The systems, like Lewis Leadership has a system that's helpful. And then, EOS has a system. There's lots of business systems out there, and they have strengths and weaknesses. I tend to be kind of I'm a buffet guy on systems. I'll take a little bit from each one that aligns the best.
Okay.
But it's where they, actually force you to say these things out loud and think them through and commit to them. That vision that I stated to you is authentic to us. It really is the truth. It's not any sort of buzzwords. But I would never sit down to get such clarity on my own. Like it's really clean to me, and every word is very much on purpose.
He's asking you the questions that we probably wouldn't ask ourselves.
Yeah.
That's good. That's what I try to do. Once in a while, I just really work with a couple of people, but it's really that same thing. Is I don't have the systems, but I do have the questions. I do understand people, and I do understand stages of life. Okay.
Yeah.
Which are different. And this is, so my other question to you is then what about the investors? So because you've made a pretty big pivot here. So they invested in a product company, and you could have said, and I don't know, maybe you did say this, that, that didn't work out. This Badgie Converge, was it Converge? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm moving on to this new thing called Bellwood Labs, and too bad, too sad, right? What happened? I mean, you could do that. Yeah. People do that, right? I mean, so what happened?
Yeah. A couple of things. I think one is that it was sort of a slow motion transition, right? It was not ever so clear and cut and dry that, like, Converge is still alive and kicking. We still maintain that product, and we still, like we want to. I have dreams for it. I tell my own team, I said, it's a first class member of our family. I just don't know how to feed it right now. I don't know how to scale that product in the way that a SaaS product needs to be scaled. So that's why we have a real clear mission for Bellwood Labs, and maybe less so for Converge. So I think the gradual nature of that transition was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think paired with that, though, is I see, maybe not a strict obligation, but a partial obligation and a partial opportunity. So, the folks I mentioned that are our investors, I think, are still strategically aligned to be able to help us grow the business. They're going to run into stuff from time to time that's a good fit for us. One of our anchor clients was a referral from one of our investors, and everything's aligned for them to do that as many times as they want if they're still an investor for us. The other part, and candidly, if there's an opportunity to keep Mark Cuban on your cap table and get him a return, that's a thing I think you want to do. But more broadly for all of the investors, I just saw an opportunity to be able to provide a return at not tremendous personal cost. It doesn't cost. I think because we didn't raise a lot more funding, it freed us to be a little bit more open-handed with how we kept the business moving forward. Because we didn't raise another round. Now I'm down to, 20, 30% of the company. I'm still the vast majority shareholder in the company. So I still get to call the shots with very minor restrictions. I can't I can't take all the money. I can't be acquired by somebody else for $1. There's investor protections in there. I would say one of the lessons from me as an entrepreneur to investors is, because Mark has wielded the terms that he has, the restrictive covenants he has so loosely, it makes me feel very free to say, if I can make a decent case for what is the right thing for the business, Mark's not going to stand in the way. If I say tomorrow, I give up, I want to be acquired, which is not even remotely the case, he'll say yes for what makes sense. And he's shown that in his character as an investor all along the way, that he is very founder friendly in that way.
Yeah. One of the things that happens, even with some of these restrictive covenants. Now, I'm an entrepreneur investor, right? But I always looked at, if the entrepreneur ever leaves the company, what do I have? I have really two hands of sand as far as I'm concerned. So every company that I've ever sold, the sale was always instituted by the entrepreneur. And even if it could have sold for more later, if the entrepreneur says, look, I want to move on, I respect that. He's created good value. I just have to say, well, it wasn't optimized in my mind, but I'm here for him. He's not there for me, kind of a thing. He built a good company. Yeah. So you're right. I like that you've been loyal to your investors, which is pretty incredible. And now they're loyal to you. The next thing that kind of happens is, if you keep building this, is it's a services company, which has far different valuations than do product companies, right? Is to say, how long do you kind of pull them along? When is enough return a return, or is it forever? And that does get you ultimately to an exit, whereas maybe it wouldn't have otherwise. You see?
Yeah.
That's sort of a bridge that you haven't crossed. You haven't approached yet with them. That's what I'm seeing happen here.
That's certainly the case. And, candidly, it is a bit of a, services business, they eat cash. You have to keep the cash healthy. And when the business is healthy, they produce cash. But what that ends up meaning is it never quite makes sense, at least so far for me, unless somebody's just resigning their shares. It never quite makes sense to have the conversation about buying somebody out either. It's always like, well, do I need this cash to grow the business, or do I need to hand it to an investor to buy them out? It's an interesting dance. I haven't fully crossed the bridge.
Yeah, that's where you are now. You're not there now, but as Bellwood starts to grow, that's going to be something, and that would be an interesting conversation to have with Mark, and to see what advice he might give you in that area, because it's. I just saw, for example, I'm dealing with what now is a large wealth management firm, which before, when I joined them in 1992, they were a small wealth management firm, but now they're, like billions under management kind of thing, right? Well, the guys that I used to work with, they're all like my age, and they want to get out. Well, there's all these partners and this same kind of situation, right? Great cash flow model and everything. They saying, like, you need to buy me out now at this new valuation. The partners are going like, well, if we have to do that, we're going to start another firm. The younger guys will start another firm, right? Because they don't want to pay this kind of. So what they wound up doing is actually getting somebody else in to buy those people out. Yet they still remain as a minority shareholder, but they are now enjoying that cash flow as opposed to those other guys that started the firm that wanted to get out and cash out. So there's models for it. You're not the only one. This is because it's like CPA firms, wealth management, lawyers. They've all done this.
Yeah.
Okay. But Mark Cuban's never invested in a law firm. Okay. But he is now. Okay. He just didn't know it. All right. When he invested.
Yep. We dragged him into it.
Yeah. So the market starts there. So let me end with this is, so where do you've done, I see it's really cool the way your 20s went along as you were sort of building all of this, building your reputation, gaining an understanding of what business really was, the technology business. You worked for some really pretty successful people there. You then get into this startup week. Is there startup weekend, I guess? Yeah. And you start looking out. You eventually start your own company. Now you're in your 30s. You go through your 30s, and there was a lot of learning that took place on being an entrepreneur and discovering who you were, really. Now here you are at what age?
44.
44 years old. You do know who you are. You do know what you enjoy doing. You do see market pull. You're comfortable enough to have an A-level coach, okay, who's going to move you along because he can now work with you on high-value sort of activities and where you're headed. What do you think your 40s look like as you go forward here?
It's requiring a different level of learning and transformation, right? The business is now getting to the point where I haven't had, this company has not had employees that didn't report to me, but that is what is required of the business. And so again, getting pulled into things that you didn't really think about before. I'm number one, I think, realizing how to really accelerate into strengths, right? To feel like I have the confidence to talk to somebody on the phone that doesn't know me and then tell them it's going to cost them 6 figures to build their product and have them say yes. I mean, that's a wild thing. And, I think one of the things talking to the guys that I know in the services business is just acclimating to the size of solution that you are capable of building. You kind of keep getting used to, like, it seems inevitable. Actually, it's been the case. Like, we've had to throw some 7-figure quotes out lately. And that would have been impossible for me to conceive of before Mark funded, or even when we ran out of money. Like, I couldn't imagine with a straight face being like, this is going to cost you, $1.6 million. But getting used to the confidence that is both what is needed and that it's something you can deliver is an acclimation. I think the other part I'm really getting a lot used to is just, structuring and providing vision for the organization is something I've not had to be used to. So defining roles, holding people accountable to roles, identifying bottlenecks. And, I was listening to one agency owner just talk about breaking different parts of the business at different times, right? You have your delivery organization and your sales and your people, and they keep on breaking each other and you keep fixing it. So I think I'm having to grow myself in new ways, right? To be what the organization needs from me.
So another way to look at this is say, I'm moving from small business owner to a bigger business CEO. And that's a big transition that very few people actually make. How many small development organizations, how many small consulting organizations are there in the United States?
Thousands. We had a whole sales process. Yeah. 10, actually at least 100,000.
Yeah, right.
We have a whole lead database filled with them for Converge.
There you go. So that's what you're trying to say. Well, I can stay that way and stay comfortable at what I'm doing and just continue to do it every day with this sort of team that I have. Or we can move to this next stage that what we are doing is we're bidding on 7-figure deals. That's what we do now.
Yeah.
And for smaller deals, we'll subcontract, maybe if we want a project manager, we'll subcontract to the small organizations, or we just don't do that. We just refer to the small organizations now.
Yeah. Well, and it's underpinned by, my frustration when I was building products was that I couldn't build more of them. I had to pick one at a time. There's a lot of people that should have the confidence that the thing they want built gets built. And so it's not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth for the sake of the vision. It's how do we help more people get what they want? And we do think we're specially qualified to do that, even though that sounds a little bit audacious and crazy sometimes.
But it will move you further up market as you build this, no doubt about it. Your average contract value is going to go up, as you get better and better team, you get better and better systems in place, and you personally grow beyond who you were. Because at some point, you're going to wake up. I think it's about 6 years from now, and you're going to be celebrating your 50th birthday.
Yeah.
And the 50s is a whole nother decade that you're going to have a plan for. So what does 50 look like is something for you to work with Bob Lewis on to say, what does it look like? What are my relationships?
It's a very good question.
Yeah. What do my relationship with my investors look like? What is my relationship with customers, with the market in general, with my referral base? That's my greater referral base, my network in Atlanta. What role am I going to be playing? And how will they see Rob, then at 50? Because it's coming.
Yeah.
So just think.
Yeah, it's a big question because you think about what you say right now. And we say this, we're talking kind of right the week after MailChimp gets acquired, after saying they were never going to get acquired. Right. And I wonder a little bit, is that a statement of what somebody who's in their 30s or 40s says, versus, I'm not going to put things on Dan and Ben. It would be an interesting conversation with them. But it seems like there was a point where it changed, right? The relationship, with the business and the people, something shifts. And I don't want to make any, we're going to be here forever. I see a long path ahead. But I don't know what 50 looks like is a great question.
Well, just got to remember Ecclesiastes 3. There's a season for everything, right?
Yeah.
And I found that in business to be true. When I first got into angel investing, I said, we're going to start companies that we're never going to sell. Mm-hmm. I really did, because I really was so it was so values and core values were so important. And and I just came out of an environment where we just built things to sell, and I just didn't like it. Everybody was on rent. Okay. Is what it felt like. And, what I found out is there is a season. Some people, they want to sell, and there is a time to sell. And I've seen people that didn't sell, me and some of my organizations, where the value peaked and then it just started to slide, and then it levels out again. And then you got it's just a business, but some people want that, which is fine, but it didn't suit me as an investor for that way. So we all learn lessons, but I do think the Bible with Ecclesiastes 3, which says is a season for everything, is something to be followed and know it's true in our lives as well as in our business cycles.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of walking me through my own seasons. Probably more than I realized.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of think that way. I don't know if being a couple of seasons ahead of you, I guess is, and I'm looking at a new season, and I'm looking for that guy that's 2 steps ahead of me to help me.
Yeah.
To say, I want to be that, when I get there, tell me how you got there. And it's, as you get older, it's harder. It's just flat harder. But Rob, this has been a lot of fun. I love our conversation. It's been great.
Thank you for the time. It's good to chat with you.
This has been great. I think you're good. This conversation, I hope it'll help a lot of people based on what you've been through, because you were on a lifetime of discovery here on who you were, and you've hit your sweet spot.
That's right.
And I think you're going to have not going to have, if you got a $1.6 million bid out for a contract and it looks like it's going to go down, you're on your way, my friend.
We're busy.
Yeah. All right. I'll close this thing out here, and then we'll.
All right. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks for attending the Charlie Paparelli Show. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Rob and Delwood Labs, special. But we all have to go through this of finding out who we are as we go through our 20s and our 30s. And our 40s really do, as Rob did, you settle in and say, this is what I have interest in and this is what I don't. And you find that the world responds to your interests. So enjoy it. Please sign up at paparelli.com, and I'll see you next week.